I've just put a link to my portfolio website in the chat. And today I was hoping to get specifically some feedback, your thoughts on my cityscape work. So if you click onto that link, the top two are some early landscape concepts that are just there to remind me I should keep working on that. But if you pop down to the next one, I've got two groupings, Sydney and Melbourne. The Melbourne one that's the image that I got that Best Black and White award for, which was fabulous. So if you pop into there, so it's this sort of this text that I'm writing to frame the work. These images were taken sort of a number of years ago, and now that I've sort of come back into this photography space after 20 years of being primarily focused in the design space, you know, I'm sort of dusting off the cobwebs of those mental files and rejuvenating this work. So what I didn't have before was sort of a conceptual frame around the work, and so I'd be really interested to see how people might see what I'm writing here, and then seeing how that does, if or not, contextualize the work. So if you just scroll down, you'll start to see the type of images that I'm collecting. The good news is last week is that my proposal to exhibit some of this work at the Ballarat International Photo Biennale has come through. So that's another good, yeah, thank you. That's another good little shot of in the arm of confidence. Yeah, I mean, it means old finger has to be pulled out and getting on and getting this done, which is always what's good about these sort of deadlines, isn't it? It keeps you motoring along. So there's a couple of key things in there. I've always been sort of really interested in the space between, you know, figurative and abstract qualities in an image, and where, you know, there is, I'm hoping that the viewer, you know, will recognize the figurative perspective, but then there is more the abstract elements, or the elements within that figurative space can start to speak for themselves. So rather than pushing into something that is wholly abstract, but just trying to work in that space in between. And obviously, as you know, as you're looking at the images, it does sort of vary between some images. And I think that's where a series works well, where you can have some that might be more on an abstract side of the equation, if you like, and others that might be falling more to the figurative, and then various instances in between. So when I was taking these, at the time, I was looking, you know, at the work of French photographer Auger way back in the 1900s, and just that whole multi-layering that he was finding with you know, the shop front windows and reflections, and that's that sort of key element that again I was finding was a good way to sort of work in this sort of figurative abstract space. So I'm happy to stop there, or if anyone's got any questions, or certainly any of the writers or in the midst there who might be going, oh, that does not make sense, Grant. What on earth are you talking about there? That sort of feedback would be most welcome.
Great, thanks, Grant. Yeah, thoughts for Grant? I'm just still scrolling through the photos, which are
I'll just make
great.
Yeah, they're beautiful. Yeah. Grant, they're really fantastic. They seem somehow out of time. You know, I was looking at the Melbourne ones, and even the details of the cars in the background don't seem like contemporary cars. There's something kind of, there's something about them that sort of feel like they're not of the now, in an interesting way. When you might see there's an image in the Melbourne streetscape of a building that looks a little bit like a Pizza Hut. That sort of took me out of that sort of time that I felt like I was in a kind of interestingly jarring way, and the posters sort of do a similar thing in the Melbourne sequence. Yeah, no, this is just a comment to say I'm really enjoying looking at them.
Yeah, yes, I mean that was sort of this. I'm hoping there's sort of a timelessness in there, and the sort of notion of the viewer. I mean, it doesn't become important necessarily of the actual location itself, but rather a representation, so that perhaps then the viewer sort of bringing their own experiences into an interpreting of the scene and what they see.
You're obviously attracted to these reflective surfaces, Grant, and that seems to be the medium or the point at which you're finding the integration of the figurative and the abstract, namely shop windows from the ones that I've looked at.
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether that, as a sort of theoretical aesthetic concept, is something that can be pushed in other directions. Like, where else can you find this kind of interface where you get this layering of images occurring naturally, you know, not post-production in the what used to be the dark room, but I guess is now just a computer.
Yeah.
Rather than layering images on top of one another, there you're actually finding them as they occur naturally. Is that like, first of all, I guess the question is, you know, that's obviously something that you're attracted to and that you're seeking out. Have you got other ideas about where you might find that? Or
it was something that I was. I mean, I think there's a lot of really great work where people are looking for abstract qualities in the landscape, for instance, and this. I thought at the time that I wasn't seeing a lot of working in this space with the reflections and these sort of inner city streets, that urban environment. So that's partly what was also influencing how I was approaching it. And you know, certainly just a sort of a fascination with sort of walking the streets, and then you have to do that at a time of day where the light is at a point where it's sort of coming into the street, and you actually work on the opposite side of the street to get the reflections happening. So rather than having the sort of direct light, so that in itself often sets up a early morning or evening, and so I found, you know, obviously shop owners and restaurants sort of started to get a bit edgy when I'd be, you know, mucking around in front of their window. So I started just sort of doing stuff, you know, a lot of this in the early morning before a lot of these places were open, or, you know, people were just sort of starting to emerge, and that gave me some, I guess, freedoms to spend the time to work with the reflection and compose it. Because certainly, you know, a good question is, well, why wouldn't you just, you know, you could do this in Photoshop? Well, you could, but there's also something I really prefer about composing this and making it happen at the point of taking the exposure, you know, at the point of shooting. And to some extent that limits what you can do and avoids getting lost within sort of all the you know, the possibilities of compose or you know, a composite image where you're putting elements together from scratch, or a blank canvas. But yeah.
Oh, sorry, Jen, you've got your hand up. Yeah.
Grant, to me, they suggest a really beautiful kind of intimacy. All those different layers, the foreground, the reflection, the what's beyond the window or the glass or the view, that kind of you know, what's across the road. To me, they really draw attention to you, the photographer. For me as a viewer, I kind of see that, feel this, because that's how we sort of see the world. In, you know, we see close up and we see reflections and we see the long view all at once when we're walking down the street. We might not be, you know, clocking at that specifically, but you do take in all those views all at once. So to me, you've created this kind of the intimacy of we're a flaneur with you. We're walking down.
Yeah, sure.
So I think that's really beautiful. That they're not just beautiful photographs and beautifully composed, but that intimacy is very, very relatable is a bit of a scungy word, but it's lovely.
Yeah. Thank you. Chris, you've got a thought?
I love these images, Grant, and you've shared them with me, and I follow you on Instagram, and I've talked about, you know, how these images remind me of the concept of the mashup, particularly in music. And with the mashup, there's a processual thing that happens where you're rapidly shuttering between two frames, where you're trying to bring two frames or two understandings into existence at the same time. And that seems to be what's happening with these reflections, certainly for me. And so I know it's not very cool, but Heidegger has this really cool paper on, I think it's called The Origin of the Work of Art, where he talks about the figure and the ground and how these two are resolved within artwork. That's really nice. And just listening to you now talking about Photoshop, that kind of analogy extends further, because with the mashup, you've got the digital work of recomposing separate materials together digitally. And that's of course coming from, and Ted might be able to speak to this, the more tangling with the material that the DJ does physically through analog techniques. So there's comparable elements in that I think are quite cool.
Thanks for that. Yeah, this is great because it gives me some sort of, you know, key phrases and whatnot to keep developing this further and keep that developing that that text around the images.
So what are you hoping to do with this series, Grant?
Well, I mean,
keep on.
Yeah. So I think certainly, you know, I at the time I was taking them and just sort of exploring and developing the vision through the act of doing. Mm-hmm. Then having sort of set them aside for a period of time and now coming back, it's a terrific opportunity to actually say, well, you know, what meaning can I perhaps give these? And so that's what I'm, mm-hmm. Before I sort of go out and then start taking, mm-hmm. adding to it, would be to go out now with a much more sort of targeted approach. Mm-hmm. Whereas, you know, whereas before it was very much in that sort of exploration and finding things that was working for me through the act of collecting hundreds of these images. So so hopefully now the next stage would be to yes, start going back to these spaces, but doing it in a much more sort of focused and direct manner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Yeah, and yeah, Chrissy and Aaron had some good references there, Dussauteau and Benjamin. And Benjamin writes quite a lot about Auger as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so he would certainly be worth looking at. Yeah, I'm kind of interested in what people are saying about the timelessness, which I agree with and understand. But also, I think one of the interesting things about this kind of street photography is, you know, with the passing of time, they become these very, you know, kind of intriguing historical documents as well, you know, which is certainly what you see when you kind of look at Auger and these other kind of street photography, you know, mid-century street photographers and so on. Yeah, yeah. So there's kind of both those things going on, a kind of timelessness and a historicity, you know, in the one image. Yeah. All right.
All right.
Cool.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Great. Thanks. That's great. That's lots of. I think it's very nice to have a look at those images. Yeah, and I'll start following you on Instagram as well if I can.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah,
right. That would be good.
Apparently, that's what people do.
Yeah, and yeah, that's really nice input from people in the chat and live
I'll just grab
as well.
a copy of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,